Have you ever thought about what the secret sauce is that turns a decent manager into a great leader? Well, it's probably not what you think. In fact, most managers struggle with this one skill and as a result miss out on the incredible results and outcomes it can bring them. Which is why in this video, I want to talk about the one game-changing skill that will elevate your leadership capacity and significantly impact the results you get, and how you can apply this one skill to your role in a real and tangible manner. Having trained now hundreds of managers, I've seen firsthand how mastering this skill can lead to promotions and bonuses and stellar reviews. So do stick around to see how you can infuse it in your day-to-day. That way you can be a leader people want to follow. So what is this one skill? Well, let me give you an example of it in action using our favorite manager on this channel, Life-Changing Linda, and see if you can guess what it is. So let's say a team member goes to Life-Changing Linda visibly upset about a recent project failure. Well, instead of immediately jumping into problem-solving mode, she decides she's going to pause, listen attentively, and validate this person's feelings. Perhaps by saying, I can see how frustrating this is for you. What would be most helpful for you in this moment? Did you notice what the one underlying skill was that Life-Changing Linda applied in this situation? Well, if you guessed emotional intelligence, you would be right. Emotional intelligence, which simply put is your ability to recognize your emotions, the emotions of others, and use this awareness to develop your own behavior and develop relationships, is a skill that is often overlooked, even though it is the underpinnings of impactful leadership. So why do I say that it's the underpinnings of impactful leadership? Well, it's because when you leverage EQ, you're able to understand and then respond, not react, to the emotions of others. You're able to manage your own emotions, which can sometimes be easier said than done, and of course, make sound decisions, which is like 80% of leadership as we are leading people who are fundamentally emotional. So how do you apply emotional intelligence to your role so that you can be an awesome sauce leader? Well, let's consider a couple of examples where the qualities of emotional intelligence should come into play. We'll consider the wrong way, and then we'll touch on the corrections in each scenario. Let's start with guilt-tripping Gina, who has a team member that is not meeting expectations, and how she might use emotions incorrectly when interacting with her team member. So in addressing the team member about their lack of meeting deadline expectations, Gina is more likely to say something like this: I'm disappointed in you, Sophia. I thought you were more dedicated than this. Now, on the surface, that sentence might not sound bad, but what is it really communicating? Well, this sentence attempts to evoke guilt and shame in Sophia. And we've all heard of managers who use shaming, blaming, and guilt to get their people to do things, to motivate their team members to act. In fact, I just talked to a manager the other day who straight up just said in front of the entire classroom of other managers, I use shame and it works really well. He's pretty proud of himself. So clearly it is a tactic that many people still use down to today. But is it right? Well, does shame work for you? It's important to know that using shame, blaming, and guilt is not emotional intelligence, but rather emotional manipulation, which is never okay. Yes, we want behavioral change, but we don't want to attack the person's character or make them feel badly in an effort to get them to act, because at the end of the day, behavioral change comes from understanding, not shame. And when people feel understood and supported, they are more likely to be motivated to change their behavior. What do you do if you have a team member that isn't meeting expectation, let's say meeting deadlines? What would the emotionally intelligent response or approach look like or sound like? Well, it might sound something like this. Sophia, I have noticed that we've fallen behind on XYZ deadline. I'm curious to understand what challenges you might be facing. Is there any specific thing that is hindering your progress? Did you notice what the difference was here? Well, it was direct and non-judgmental. Why? Because in this case, we're willing to get curious to understand what's really going on, which is a vital component of emotional intelligence. Okay, next, let's consider a completely different scenario where a manager might completely remove emotions out of the equation. Enter cold Colin. So he's the type of manager that believes work is purely transactional and that emotions have no place in the workplace. And so because of this, he prioritizes tasks and deadlines over people, often making decisions without considering the impact on his team. So his approach is often seen as insensitive. So what would be the impact of his style, do you think? Well, an insensitive manager is more likely to achieve some outcomes in the short term, but significantly damage the team culture and eventually the outcomes in the long term. Again, we're dealing with human beings who require consideration and connection. Now, yes, we have work to do, and trust me when I say that I have struggled with trying to find the balance of this myself, because sometimes you're just trying to get something done, and the last thing you want to do or have time for or have energy for is considering how this person feels over here and massaging the message for this individual over here and tweaking your approach over here. Like, it can be a lot, right? But the valuable lesson that I've learned that I want to pass on to you is that knowing your team, which is a relational investment, is just good economics. Because the more you understand someone, you're more equipped to put them in a place where they can excel and achieve the defined goals that you've outlined. The more you invest in them, you know when to pull them off something because they need a breather. The more you know them, the more equipped you are to tailor your approach so that you are having a productive conversation rather than a defensive one. For example, one of my NMA students, Liz, right, when she joined our program, she was in constant friction with one of her team members. In fact, it was a motivating factor for her to join NMA. So when she and I talked about the situation in the group, we dug in and sought to understand, right? And we strategized some questions to help her facilitate a conversation with this team member so that her team member can talk to her and she can uncover what was at the root of what was causing this problem. Well, she asked these questions and uncovered that this team member is simply a perfectionist. Now, once Liz found out that piece of vital information, we were able to adjust her approach and framing with this team member when providing needed feedback. And I'm happy to say that that team member and her are no longer at odds. In fact, I just heard from Liz, and she's actually talking about promoting this team member in the upcoming annual review. Moral of the story? Well, if you don't seek to develop relationships with your team members, a component of emotional intelligence, you're more likely to set them up for failure and thus reap the consequences of being that manager that isn't able to achieve sustained performance through their team. Now, if this is the type of support you're looking for as you navigate management and you want to learn more about the new Manager Accelerator program where I coach many people managers, much like yourself on a weekly basis, then a great place to start is with my free training where I dive into the malleable framework that we use in getting you upskilled. So head on over to makitaandrews.com/training to learn more. So here's the thing. Sometimes we can take that relational aspect of things or empathy though too far. And I see this often enough with the managers I work with who go above and beyond to accommodate their team members' requests and provide far too much leeway to the point where A, either they begin to lower their standards for some and cause this atmosphere of perceived favoritism. B, they end up doing all the work themselves because they feel bad, and then they end up overwhelming themselves and struggling to complete all the things on the plate. Or C, they end up struggling to make the tough decisions of terminating a team member that needs to go. I want to be clear. Empathy is a great thing and a core component of emotional intelligence. However, what you are doing in that moment is you are being nice and not showing empathy. Why do I say that? Well, it's because niceness is about being agreeable and avoiding the necessary conversation, whereas empathy is simply about understanding somebody else's perspective, which requires you to engage in those necessary conversations. Empathy does not demand that you lower your standards. It's niceness that does. It's a nuanced difference, but it is different. I tell you that from experience. The thing is, though, that even though EQ is an important skill, it's just one piece of the puzzle, and that's because to truly excel, you need the proper scaffolding skill set, in which case you want to watch this video here next.